Hey, it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. We are zooming in and focusing in on a great viewer question, and that is essentially how do you reestablish a feeling of normalcy, sort of a normal for you, individually, uniquely, especially in times like we are in the midst of right now, a pandemic, an upsurge of civil unrest. There really is 30 million to 40 million people out of work. Kids are home from school. Everyday restaurants that you might go to in your routine, everyday stores, shopping, your little shuffle in the neighborhood. You might be finding these stores closed right now. You might be on quarantine or limited quarantine. So really the external environment has really imposed a significant amount of change and disruption to what people might consider, air quotes, normal for them. The people they see, the places they go, the hours and time frame that they spend and do these things is all of a sudden unraveled, and it needs to be reestablished in basically a new firmament or a new, ether, which really is important because it has to arrive and originate within. And when I say filament, I mean really within the inner self. We talk oftentimes in psychology about an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. When we talk about manipulation, when we talk about exploitation and victimization, particularly for those people who have found themselves in relationships or close at hand with people who could be narcissistic, psychopathic, have an undue sort of surveillance on them, if you will, control, essentially creating a dynamic that many people have found themselves in where they feel disempowered or powerless to reestablish sort of a vision for the new normal. Realize the cause that creates this effect is because when you have a lifestyle, when you have a life, when you have goals or you're following a vision and you think things are going to be such a way, you develop a vision of your future. Sometimes it can be very crystalline or crystal clear. This is how it's going to go. This is how it's going to be. So you have a vision with which you're acting on and moving towards. And this is how you learn and plan and dream really for the future. So it helps to really motivate your behaviors. But what happens when this vision or this dream is disrupted or shattered, which means it's no longer that way? It can be very disruptive. It can be very unsettling. It can really, put people on a feeling of shaky ground. They can oftentimes not have the support or the moral support and social connections that they truly need to thrive. Even things like people say just being able to have the drive to work would help them to unwind or think through things that they're going to be doing through the day. They get themselves ready mentally. They can decompress. They can kind of be away from the noise, the clamor, and the distraction. And namely, that of sort of what I would say is acquiescing or conceding to the needs or judgment of others, which is an important thing that people detox from when you understand how to establish a sense of normal, a new sorts of normal and sort of feel good in these times. Realize then the cause that's created this effect is because you're looking towards and looking forward to a vision. This is just how the mind works. You have a goal, an objective that you're working towards, and it will motivate your behaviors. So if this is changed, then it's very important to then reestablish. But before oftentimes people can reestablish, they have to understand the interplay or dance of emotions within, particularly that of the meaning or the interpretation that is associated with the feeling. And this does take discipline, so listen up. When you're talking about reestablishing a new normal, you have to realize that this is okay to have a new normal for you. And to establish a sense of new normal is to understand and release the limitations that might be hindering you or disempowering you from this. Namely, that of sort of the interpretation of change and being able to be decisive and taking new action or what might be radical action and changing of the foundation. Oftentimes people have a meaning associated with change, which makes them feel that they are in a fight or flight or they're not in their best focus. So it's important that you realize that oftentimes if you're feeling anxious about this, there is a reason. If you're feeling unsettled, that is a reason. So we want to quell those unsettling feelings first. You make your best change when you're in a calm disposition, when you've released the pressure and the interpretation of having this sort of vision moved. In other words, life is never going to be the same. I'll never have this again. We'll never go there again. What's going to happen to my finances? What's going to happen to my loved ones? What's going to happen to my health? All these sort of thoughts, which are oftentimes deeply rooted in the fight or flight, which is the amygdala, which is a natural sort of energizer to assist you in times of urgency or emergency, is to get a handle on this so it does not wreak havoc. And so realize that oftentimes then when so people then oftentimes feel a sense of rejection or loss, or something being taken from them in the midst of this change. Their peace has been taken from them. Their quiet has been taken from them. Their vision of their future has been taken from them. Their hope and their promises, have been taken from them. So this can be very deflating. So you have to realize the interpretation. And oftentimes that the body, if you feel, the amygdala, studies have been shown that in the fight or flight, that if you are, hyper-criticized, rejected, controlled, or manipulated by others, it's a very disempowering feeling. And that then people then interpret it that they are not strong enough, or that they have to acquiesce or conform to the judgment or measuring stick set up by another. In other words, it's not internally derived, it's derived by some external source, which might not be in your best interest or accurate. Especially if you're at the hands of a narcissist or a psychopath, it is to adjust and adapt to their needs and their goals and what's going to be best for them, and not necessarily what's going to be best for you. So you have to draw a very clear line and understand that people, companies, organizations have an agenda. And we were watching a special the other night on 60 Minutes that talks about, how, a lot of this was disrupted in the pharmaceutical industry, and then they had to adjust that because of the addiction that it was causing, and then the helplessness at the source of addiction. So realize that you have to adjust and come within, and realize that the body oftentimes, because if it's felt a sort of a removing of its vision or its goals, and then if you're met with sort of a feeling of harshness or disempowerment that can be at the hands of others that are trying to control you, whether it be an individual, a community, a government, you see it's the body oftentimes will interpret this as rejection. So I'm being rejected. And then I'm not loved, or I am not lovable. Is oftentimes if people reject you, the body interprets it as if you're being abandoned. So you might not feel very normal or very empowered or very strong or very happy. So it's very important that you realize it's that your time, is yours. This belongs to you. This is in your possession. This is in your realm. This is within your control. You are the captain, of the ship. So realizing first the feelings is to understand if you have experienced this sense of loss or feeling of sort of a lack of a goal, and direction, and feel this abnormality, or perhaps your situation is different from those around you. It can feel very isolating, and then if people don't acknowledge and validate that, it can feel very ostracizing. It's as if you're sort of not part of the group, you're not part of the scene, you're not in the same energetic vibration or the same energy, if you will. So realize, first of all, to interpret this, we have to get back to the drawing board and realize that your vision and moving forward is where it's at. So that is what you want to embrace and fall in love with. That is yours. That is in your jurisdiction, your possession, and your power. We literally do have the power to create. We literally do have the power to manifest. You need to acknowledge and validate that truth and really digest what that means for you. That means you have the ability to change in the direction of the positive. I call this positive orderly direction thinking, pod thinking, versus negative orderly direction thinking, or nod thinking, which takes you further away from your happiness, your fulfillment, and your best empowerment and getting along with others. So to do this, realize that you have to adjust that interpretation that you are feeling, if you are experiencing that. And to realize then, to set a new normal for you is saying, I am setting a new normal for me. And it's okay for it to be uniquely within you, because what's right for you might not be right for others. But how do you establish that? You need to get back to the vision of the future. In other words, where do you, coming from a place of peace, prosperity, abundance, and wholeness, and a fullness of your I am and your identity, and then looking now, knowing this to be the case, what can I now structure to impress myself, not impress others? Because part of the problem with adaptation is that oftentimes people, if they're used to that external locus of control and sort of, having society normalizing them, it's a different locus of control. So realize if you have been sort of adjusting to another, to how can I phrase this? To impress another person, but it sort of deflates you within. In other words, if you're always doing to appease others, and oftentimes that's to control the environment so that you have a positive environment and ethos around you. Realizing it's more important for you to impress yourself. Once again, it's more important for you to impress yourself than to impress others. But you might not need to get out of the rut. If you've experienced this, maybe this has been a sort of an emotional habit, a relational habit for you for a long period of time. And so the body has then rehearsed and rememorized this as a sort of program to impress others, to have that sort of factoring in the equation. Realize how important it is. Today, I'm going to impress myself. Today, I'm going to impress myself. To create a new normal for me, today I'm going to impress myself. So there's oftentimes very opportunities where you might feel most uncomfortable. When you're from a moment of peace right now in the privacy of these videos, just be relaxed. Put your feet up, unwind, take a load off, lean back, release the tension, do a body scan. Are you armoring yourself? Are you clutching yourself? Relax the muscles for a moment so you can take a break, take a breather, relax, and then just sort of understand the adjustment that you can make. And so you can ask yourself, what are 10 to 20 things that I can do that will impress myself, that will lead me to a consistent and ongoing new vision that I can reestablish? And as we talk about in the video, the subconscious mind really responds best to images, and also to commands, very short commands. And that can be in the form of a written word, such as, I know my strength. I know my strength. If you repeat what I call an affirmation, I know my strength. I know my strength. You need to reassert this, because oftentimes if you're in an environment where there's been a lot of upheaval and you have lost sort of that feeling of being disempowered, or sort of not feeling that you fit in or are on point with what quote unquote air quotes is normal, realize that that is just a construction of the mind. It really doesn't have any, oftentimes anything to do with reality, especially if it's a negative thought. Realize that the mind, if you're getting overly attached to these negative thoughts, you need to just let them go, like as if you were looking at a creek and just see a leaf or a stick floating by. You just let it go. So you have to detach from the current. Meaning that it's to understand how that thoughts create things, and that oftentimes it can create a little bit of a thought, disruption or a thought disorder. So you need to reestablish some very simple commands, 3 to 7 words. I know my strengths. I know my strengths. So this is for you. This is to impress you, not to impress others. You want to impress yourself. Wow, I did this. Wow, I knew I could be calm here. Wow, I knew I didn't have to freak out. Wow, I didn't have to acquiesce to another. Wow, I did not have to give in to the harsh feelings or the manipulation. Wow, I really don't need to be judged in that way. It's to understand that oftentimes these are nothing more than attachments of the mind, which are based on judgment, good or bad, and so if you're being motivated by that judgment, you need to be able to release or suspend judgment for a moment. Release or suspend judgment. It'll give you some relief. Rather than interpreting, this is awful, this is horrible, this will never change, I don't have a future. These can be subconscious thoughts that maybe if you're around people who don't give you a chance to communicate, you never get a chance to air out. So they kind of stay bottlenecked down or pushed down, and can cause, unhappiness or a feeling of isolation, or, not fitting in, or being isolated, or not normal. So you have to impress yourself and reestablish what is the new normal for you. I know my strengths. I know my strengths. So you need to get a grip on that first. Yes, we need to get to the cause that creates the effect. It's like getting the soil ready to plant. You have to do some soil work first. You have to get it prepped up. And that's just being calm. That's just knowing what, where we're at right now. It's kind of like knowing where we're at on, the map. What is the latitude? What is the longitude? You are at a new field. You are not at a dead end. You are at a fresh, new, open field that is open for the planting. You're not facing a wall. You're facing an open field. You have to realize that there is a difference. And it is nothing more than the construct of the mind that oftentimes was instilled at an earlier time that's disruptive. Does that make sense? In other words, it's kind of, to use a garden analogy, it's like getting rid of the vines that have a stranglehold. They're trying to, for their energy, their purpose, do such and such to your personal growth or your presence or your I am. Your I am, which is the very important place that you begin. I am. So that can be really this one of the most powerful statements you can make, and you need to be able to assert this. Say this to yourself. Say this out loud. I always recommend saying affirmations out loud, because not only does your body assert this, but you also are hearing with your own ears. You are impressing yourself. You need to impress yourself, not impress others. If you're disappointing others, Woo! Cheer for you, especially if it's someone who is trying to get you to acquiesce to their goals, their needs. You have to understand that you have your own needs, oftentimes that they aren't experiencing. You know best. I know best. You need to state that. I know best. And have that with a degree of trust and conviction and seriousness and truth and validity. But oftentimes, if people haven't given you that sort of support, then you might not ever have that confidence. So really right now, in the moment of the pandemic, is a very great opportunity to reset this and establish really where that divine spark is, really where the flint hits the steel is really in that inner spark. So knowing where to find that spark, the pilot light, is really important. And that you oftentimes finding that in a relaxed state is your best opportunity, because it gives you a chance to reestablish a vision for your future given the new data, given the new circumstance and information. And then restructuring your day so that you have some consistency for yourself. Creating a new consistency, a new physical and emotional habit that's based on personal empowerment. In other words, it just reminds me of back in the day. They used to have Prince Spaghetti days. It was like Wednesday would be Prince Spaghetti Day. That was kind of their thing, and it's Prince Spaghetti night. And I think a lot of families adopted that. This is for, people in the U.S. I'm not sure if you guys have Prince Spaghetti. We've got a lot of international viewers, but you would say it's Prince Spaghetti night, and then it would be Wednesday, and you'd have your spaghetti, and you'd have whatever, but it would create a new normal in your little, in your inner group. And this is what we call, your inner group is your sphere of influence. Realize that you have a sphere of influence in your life. It's important then, in the privacy of these videos, to acknowledge and validate who is in your sphere of influence. You can also write that down on a sheet of paper, 1 through 20. Who is in my sphere of influence? Is it a father, a doctor, a lawyer, an Indian chief? Is it a newscaster? Is it a writer, a journalist? Is it a movie star? Just without editing, without censoring, without saying, oh, I don't think so. If you ask yourself these automatic questions, then you'll come up right away, with your truth. So you need to bypass that inner censor and that inner judge, which makes things so difficult. Cease the judgment for a while. Just let it go. Stop evaluating and allow it to be. So, then when you understand that, then you can understand who can not only support your change or who can deter from your change. It's important that you very much understand these moving parts. This might be difficult for you if you have a history of trauma, a history of neglect, or a history of abuse. Why do we say this? Because people who have been victimized, abused, lied to, manipulated, and had really some very difficult settings where, you were not allowed to exist in the I am in a comfortable, empowered way. It's very much like this. Have you ever seen a tomato that was, you got some tomatoes, and accidentally you drop them on the floor. You pick them up right away and you go, oh man, oh good, the tomatoes are okay. But then when you go to the bowl 5 days later, the tomatoes, they had their skin broken open and then they have a mold. So you have to realize that if there's been some open wounds or open exposure, it's kind of like that's the place where some of the little tendrils can get in and deter you from your true personal strength and establishing your new normal, that where you're impressing yourself. It's most important for you to be able to impress yourself. And so remember that. And so establishing the new normal. and acknowledging where, if any, there were any sort of wounds or open sort of gaping areas where you might be soft, tender, or scarred from the past. Acknowledge and validate this. Understand the cause that's created the effect so that you can say, wow, that is where I'm tender. That is where I have to be gentle. Wow, that is where I've never had a boundary before. I need to create a boundary. And this is what makes me feel safe. So number one in empowerment is feeling safe. If you're constantly having to acquiesce and adjust to the needs of others, in other words, conforming to a measuring stick of how others think you should be versus having it within, it's always going to feel stressful and it's going to deplete you, de-energize you, and deflate you. So realize, you need to pull that within and you need to say, thank you, but no thank you very much for the judgment. But no, you have to own for yourself. This is empowerment. This is your I am. And this will impress yourself and help you to reestablish a new normal. So looking at your schedule for the week, knowing that you want to create a new normal for you, meaning looking at your structure of your day, looking at the structure of your hour, your morning, your afternoon, your evening. What are some basic, sort of organizational, natural sort of structures that you have that you can work with. So you have a morning, you might have an afternoon and an evening. So you might just never, make any adjustments because that has been your normal, but this is now longer feeling normal for you. So now we need to look at certain segments of your time, your morning, your afternoon, your evening, and then your overnight. So getting your big picture and seeing, what you're doing in those quadrants of your schedule. Is your sleep affected? Is your evening affected? Is your afternoon affected? Is your morning affected? Right now, where do you find, the most degree of upset? Because then you can see, okay, well, at least for right now, this part of my schedule is going to remain intact. This is then the new clay that I have to work with. It's like, here's a block of clay. You can cut off a chunk. You can roll it up into a ball. You can put it into a triangle. You can keep it a rectangle. You've got this in your hand. So in other words, you're going to shape that morning, that afternoon, and that evening. And creating a new normal, which means adding some regularity and consistency. With repetition and experience, you pick things up. And you have to get through the initial phase where it might be difficult. Just like when someone begins to work out, they go, oh man, this hurts, this is uncomfortable. After 6 weeks, they're like, I can't wait to go walking. I can't wait, and go jogging and I can get a breather. I can't wait until I do my walk. I can finally have some peace. But do you understand? You have to create a new habit, which is going to take at least 4 to 6 weeks. Knowing that to be the case, you have to hold yourself accountable to that time frame for adjusting and not give up in the duration, of that uptick. So you have to realize it's going to take a little bit more pedal to the metal in the beginning to get you, you have to be better at enforcing, especially your new discipline in those first 30 days to 45 days. So as I stress and emphasize, you must have an appointment book. You must have an appointment book. I don't care if you're 80. I don't care if you're 12. I don't care if you're 50. I don't care if you're 60. I don't care if you work or you don't work. You need to have an appointment book. I have nothing to write in there, peace and harmony. Okay, great. Well, you're going to start. You're going to start writing things in there. Oh, but only businessmen use that peace and harmony. Only teachers do that. Oh my God, I can't. This would be crazy. Get yourself an appointment book. Do you matter? Does your life matter? Would you like to feel good and in charge and happy? Do I have an amen? Do I have a hallelujah? Do I have a yes or a maybe? If that's the case, then you need to be able to establish, if not in the written, getting to the written, and structuring a new normal for you that is impressive to you, that gets you to your goal. And reestablish that so you can then indulge in that, but keep it consistent. But you have to add to the structure. You have to add to that morning, that afternoon, and that evening, and then the overnight. So if you had 4 quadrants, how can you make an adjustment to quadrant 1, the morning, consistently? How can you make an adjustment to the quadrant afternoon consistently? How can you make an adjustment to the quadrant evening consistently? And then in the overnight. That'll give you a sense of empowerment. You might start out little. In other words, I read 1 paragraph, in this quadrant, and I go for a 10-step walk in this quadrant. And then over here, I pull up, instead of doing my usual numbing activity, I'm going to do something that is soothing. I'm going to light a candle. I'm going to play a new music. I'm going to gaze out the window. I'm going to gaze at the water. You have to have an addition. You have to create an addition. You have to have a building in. This is for you. You have the hammer, you have the nail, you have the wood, you have it all. You got basic pieces here. Boom. And so you have very, very slight, even if it's like just something very light. If you were just to, instead of being silent, you start saying, I like this. Even little emotional changes, communication changes, making a phone call instead of doing nothing, sending an email instead of doing nothing, praying instead of doing nothing, a very specific type of praying, eating a specific food, doing a new sort of activity with your hands, whether it's knitting, embroidering, putting lotion on, getting anything that is resensitizing of yourself. You can utilize as a foundation any of your senses. I'm going to go, and instead of just doing my normal, I'm going to go ahead and smell the flowers. And then you'll pick this up, but you have to be consistent for 4 to 6 weeks. It's going to be more difficult in the beginning, and then it'll become a new normal for you. This is the evolution from the consciously incompetent to the consciously competent. There's so much in this video. I hope we're not too over your head. It's your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope these videos do help. Please share, please subscribe, please donate for more great tools, videos, discussion, and support. Peace be with you, and have a beautiful day.